And we're going to shift gears here fairly rapidly. If you remember back in the 80s, anyone remember the 80s or the 70s, we had a radio station that beamed all the way into Lincoln, Z92 radio, rock radio, fantastic place. One of my favorite guys to listen to was Otis XII and his buddy Diver Dan Dewey. On top of that, their wonderful discussions, one of which I remember probably the best was that they talked all morning and took phone calls about a pair of twins, you know, twin babies. They were born and they were separated at birth. And they wondered, you know, if they could study those babies later when they grew up, perhaps they would have the same characteristics, like the same music. And of course, it turned out they were baby gorillas. Now, I don't know if you remember that routine. They were baby gorillas separated at birth at some zoo. Some cruel zookeeper separated them. So Diver Dan and Otis XII talked about that. I'm not asking Otis to go back and try to remember that, but I remember it quite well, even if it didn't happen. You know how that goes? Sometimes you remember the things that didn't happen better than the ones that did. This is all to say that it made quite an impression on me. And then later on down the road, about 2000, 2001, I heard that he was writing. I have spies in Omaha, and some of his friends, Matt Mason, Sarah Mason, Todd Robinson over at UNO, said he's been writing, and he sent a book off to England, to a contest. He did quite well. And so he tried another one, and it did even better. And you can pick up the details, but the point is, this guy can write as well as talk. He's written radio plays. If you remember Space Commander Whack, that was some of the great radio that came out of Omaha. This is all wonderful stuff, and one of the great personalities from Omaha that I am just forever indebted that he would drive all the way up the boring Interstate 80 without falling asleep more than 2 or 3 times and come to bless us with his presence. He did bring a few books with him, so if you'd like to buy one a little bit later on, that would be great. Other than that, I'm going to be quiet here. I'll point at the tip jar. We have the Elvis tip jar here tonight. Be sure and drop a little money in so that gas money will be forthcoming. So along with the Elvis tip jar and Otis, sit back and enjoy yourselves. Otis.
I'm more of a Bob Newhart. I like to sit down. So, yeah, that works good. That's good. It's only it. These things are tough. There we go. It's always an honor to be asked to read anywhere, and I do a few readings. But when I came tonight and I was sitting there and I was listening to Paul play and then Barbara's magnificent poetry, and I realized I probably really came here tonight to listen. And I especially thank you, Barbara, for the visions. Writers, even of things like Space Commander Whack, writers are prophets, they're dreamers. And some of the prophecies are important, and I think we heard some tonight. And I would like some more applause for Barbara, please, if we could. It also makes me rethink my decision when Rex said, you want to go first or second? But it's way too late for that now, so just magnificent stuff. Yeah, I am Otis XII. I am also Douglas Vincent Wesselmann, which is a birth name, which just didn't work in show business very well. To my mother's dismay, and my father was frankly kind of glad I wasn't using my real name. But it's, I have made a living of of sorts on radio and television and doing other things, working with orchestras and narrating, and as I've said, it's been a good job. There's no heavy lifting involved. So, except for a box of books or two, which I always have in the trunk of my car. So if you would care to buy books later, that'll work as well. What I'm going to read from to start is my novel, Tales of the Master, the Book of Stone. And it's published by an Omaha company who took a chance on me, and I'm proud to announce that as of yesterday, the second printing has sold out. Yay. So that means, as a writer, I can now go to the grocery store. I have about that much money. H.L. Mencken said once, 2 forms of writing pay regularly. Oh, sure. Bad checks and ransom notes. It's one of my favorite quotes. But I did leave radio for a while, moved to Walnut, Iowa, and wrote full-time for about 5 years. And this is, actually, I worked really hard on a couple of novels that did win some recognition in the UK. This book I wrote in between those, while I was waiting for them to be published here and become great bestsellers, which none of them did. And then this turned out to be the book that got published here. So, but I'm very proud of it. Tales of the Master. Here's the prologue. The baby was dying. Did I say the baby was dying? I meant the baby was crying. I could hear her. I would usually have gone to her right away, but I thought she was just crying. What I'm trying to say is, I didn't know my baby was dying. My wife was out, I don't remember where. I was sitting at my computer. I'm a writer, and so you can understand I was looking for a sentence. I just needed one more sentence. The baby was crying. I was so close to the right words. When I found them inside my head, my fingers put them on the screen into the file. I hit save. The words were stored on a chip. That sentence is still on the hard drive. It must be there. Not one single phrase or syllable is left inside my head. The baby stopped crying. My wife came home. She went upstairs. I know my wife screamed. I don't think she screamed any real words. Memory is a strange thing. In my nose, I can smell the mock orange blossoms in the vase by my desk that day. My fingers still shake with the same tiny tremor that began with that scream. That day, I had a sprig of fresh mint in my tea. I can taste that curious coolness, recall the cold from tongue to gullet to gut just by thinking back. I don't drink tea anymore. The baby was dying. I didn't know, I swear. Out of that prologue grew this whole book. Although someone told me I couldn't possibly write a book with that beginning, to begin a story in absolutely the bleakest, darkest place you can. But that's where I chose to begin this story, and something organic grew out of it, and basically the entire book was written in 4 weeks, which is pretty quick work, especially for me. I'll read chapter 1, a portion of chapter 1 for you as well. I will assure you, without it being a spoiler, that though it begins in the bleakest place you can begin a story, it ends in the brightest place you can end one. Chapter 1, a plan. It was the last day of my life. That was the plan. I stood behind the trunk of an old pin oak tree and looked back up the street of my house. There was a dirty yellow Ryder truck backed into the driveway. A woman was shuttling back and forth from the loading ramp to the front door. She was my wife, but at that moment, I watched her as a stranger might from a comfortable distance. We'd been living in Sycamore for about 4 years. I think there was a vague hope that fresh soil would revive us. The grave was only 50 miles away in Omaha. At first, my wife visited the cemetery every weekend, then she went every 3 months or so. I went once. The air smelled like river mud and lead. The woman carried a lamp with a Tiffany shade out of my house and disappeared into the cargo box. At that moment, I couldn't seem to drag her name onto my tongue. Cole, Cole, a child's voice, a tug on my pants leg. I looked down at Ali. I knew his name. Cole, take me, Cole, take me. Ali was 8 years old. Big Kurdish eyes stared up at me like one of those moist-eyed orphan paintings. The kid and I were both refugees. If I could have liked anyone, I would have liked him. When I first ran into the kid months ago, I made the mistake of giving him half my chocolate donut. Strays never forget food. Cole! He was waiting for a response. Until his family moved here, the only Kurds I'd ever seen were distant little specks on a muddy mountain, courtesy of some vaguely guilt-ridden CNN story. Now the mountain had come to Muhammad. They lived next door. Okay, Ali, come with me. He smiled, all brown skin and white hen's egg teeth. He pointed at my house. She's leaving. Yeah, she's leaving, Ali. I grabbed his little hand and tugged him on behind me. Suddenly, I wanted to be on the move. I felt exposed. I didn't want her to see me. The morning was brightening. I needed to put more space between us. Sycamore, Iowa, has a population of 897 people. The main street, called Antique Row, was still paved in brick. The old pavers only heave up in a couple of spots, especially where the big trucks turn off Highway 38 for the grain elevator. Lined by brittle old pin oaks, the street was like a tunnel under the branches. Victorian homes flanked the road as it arrowed off the interstate and headed south into uptown. Here in Iowa, we call downtown uptown. Don't ask why. The buildings are old red brick false fronts, 2 stories high, neatly painted and fronted by turn-of-the-century glass globe streetlights. A post office with a winter-whipped threadbare flag that was flanked by a restaurant in the Legion Hall. The rest of the block was antique stores and 2 taverns. A block before you get there is Honey's Cafe. Honey calls everybody Honey. Farmers gather at the cafe's table early and catch up on gossip and hash browns. As Ali and I passed by the big front window, all the decal-capped heads popped up and took our measure. There wasn't any hostility to it, just a bit of primitive watchfulness. The sense of the moment was like a big dog at his food bowl, stopping mid-chew to see who had disturbed his meal. A quick sniff, and he starts chewing again. I didn't know where Ali and I were heading, but uptown was the right direction. A few pickup trucks and cars were moving. The women used their whole hand to make a quick greeting, and they smiled. Men just made quick eye contact from behind the bug-splattered windshield and then lifted their pointer fingers. That little one-finger move meant acceptance. At least I took it as such. We passed the Owl House, and it stared at us. The twin-peaked roof with a steep valley like a beak running straight out to the front. 2 huge second-floor windows like eyes, and a Victorian gingerbread that gave the impression of feathers, gave it the look of its namesake. I picked up the pace. A woman lived at the Owl House. I didn't want to run into her today. She had a way of sensing the future. Thanks. Cole is the guy, and obviously the whole book takes place in this one day. He's going to kill himself. And that's the story in this book. Now, we were talking about my UK books.
Great, doesn't it?
You're going to keep time? Rex, where's Rex? Keeping time? All right. I hope I didn't break this by dropping it. We'll find out. I did, there's a competition over in the UK called the Debut Dagger. It's for crime novelists, crime writers, run by the British Crime Writers Association. They're quite a prestigious bunch. You know, you probably heard of many of their members if you read crime fiction. It's very popular. When I moved to Walnut, I wasn't writing this, I was going to write crime fiction because you could sell crime fiction, and I wrote this book called On the Albino Farm. And it will be out eventually, someday. But it got shortlisted for this prize and shocked the hell out of me and got me a trip to London, where I went over to London to hear myself not win. So the next year I had completed another novel in the series called Sometimes a Prozac Notion, featuring the same characters, somewhat light, weird, funny, but dark at the same time. It got shortlisted, so I went back again and once again didn't win. But I was making lots of friends in London. The third year, I got shortlisted again for another book called Dead Man Dancing, and didn't win. So I gave up on the lighthearted crime and decided to write a historical novel about Edgar Allan Poe. And it's entitled Imp, I-M-P. It's a hard word to say, actually. Imp, being the lost notebooks of Rufus Wilmot Griswold in the matter of the death of Edgar Allan Poe. Rufus Wilmot Griswold was actually Poe's literary executor and wrote a scathing article in the paper upon his death. It was the death announcement, which just tore Poe to pieces, and then eventually stole all the rights to his works from his family. So on the surface, a very reprehensible character. I turned him into the hero of the story. So here's a little note that begins the book, and then I'll read the first chapter too. I hope it's I never timed these. So. This is a note from the editor. Edgar Allan Poe left Richmond, Virginia on September 27th of 1849, bound via steamship for Baltimore, where he was to catch a train north to Philadelphia and then on to New York City. He never arrived at his final destination. Found shabbily dressed and incoherent in a Baltimore gutter on October 3rd, he was taken to the city's Washington College Hospital, where he died, still delirious, on October 7th. Nothing whatsoever was known of his activities in the period from his boarding of the boat in Richmond until his discovery nearly a week later. Those 6 missing days have remained one of the most intriguing of all the unsolved mysteries in literary history. By the way, that is true. In September of 2005, here the fiction begins. A musty leather folio was located at the bottom of a misplaced carton stacked in the archives of the University of Iowa's Poe collection. This folio, misplaced among the papers of noted Poe scholar Thomas Mabbitt, contained several handwritten journals signed and dated by Mr. Rufus Wilmot Griswold, Poe's literary executor. These are the contents of those journals, a complete telling of the facts related to the last lost week in the life and death of Edgar Allan Poe. And that's the story. It's all from the notebooks. Here is chapter 1, a note: areas of study that tempt our intellects, but which are too entirely spiritually dangerous for the wise man to pursue. Thus I have kept this story as the closest of secrets. Only now, as my death approaches, do I surrender this manuscript into other hands, scholarly hands, trusting that care will be taken to shield it from the unprepared eye. My soul's course has long been set, and I pray God will forgive me for losing this truth on any unsuspecting soul. I ask only that those who examine my words understand that all the depravity, horror, and perversity contained in this telling are meant as a caution and a warning. If there is terror and damnation, let it be known that the evil contained here is always to be judged as, in essence, a dark reflection of divine light. It was neither my intention nor my desire to be witness to the black events of that week in Baltimore. Indeed, none are even aware of my presence during the disturbing series of calamities that occurred that early autumn. My friend's condition compelled me to keep all these matters confidential. As a friend, I have kept to this course until now. I pray you will forgive me this need, for it is just that. As I feel death approach, I am compelled to let loose this weight that has become an anchor chained to my immortal spirit. I must break those links so that I am free of my grievous failures and my mortal sins. This is the truth of the burdensome decision that I made that terrible day with the smell of burnt flesh in my nose. I pledged myself to keep all of these tragic events beyond the reach of coarse intellects. I swore that I would never reveal this chronicle of a damned society, a fallen world, a waking nightmare that even now, years later, I can scarce believe happened in reality. So I implore your forgiveness for the crude, even shocking nature of this narrative. Stop now if your nature is delicate, or if your spiritual condition is unsteady. The dead and the undead, the murdered and the dismembered, the smell of opium, the stench of alcohol, all these degradations and hellish tragedies that plague the underbelly of our civilization await you. I will endeavor to relate the case dispassionately. If I lose sight of the ultimate order of God's creation and his unknown purposes, know that I too was scarred by these occurrences. Murder echoes through a man's life. I am in the end as base as any man and prone to self-justification. Finally, I begged for the blessing of my poor friend, who has passed from this plane into eternity. I undertook to deflect all from the nature of these, his final days. I marked him with one sin in order to distract those who would destroy his legacy should they discover the true nature of the circumstances that surrounded his death. Now, with his immortality assured and my decline into obscurity ordained, I removed these pages from the safe where I've kept them these last 8 years. I consign them to you and your interested associates. Judge for yourself if he is to be condemned or celebrated. Weigh the factors of the case and decide. This is the truth of it. The disturbing events of that week in Baltimore, and the death of my friend Edgar Allan Poe, as told by his final companion, his literary executor, his failed assassin, myself. Signed, Rufus W. Griswold. Good. Now this book, Imp, for the 4th year in a row, I was shortlisted for the award. I went, even though I hadn't gone the 3rd year because I was tired of spending money to not win, but I went and I won the Debut Dagger Award.
What'd you win?
I won 500 pounds. The trip cost $1,000. So that's a perfect determination that you are indeed qualified to be a writer. Because you're that crazy. And I have an agent now in Edinburgh, Scotland, which is a wonderful thing. The book is all written, as you can tell, in the flowery Gothic style, because that's Poe's style, and I try to write it like a Poe book. And although you have to clean it up a bit if you read Poe, some of it is, some people call him America's best bad writer, because some of his stuff is genius and some of it is almost unreadable. It's really, because he would churn it out and he was frequently drunk while doing it, so the product is uneven, but to match that Gothic feel. Now this book will be printed soon, published, but right now it's on Kindle on Amazon. So, do you have time to read a couple poems? Do I?
What's the name of it?
Oh, that's called Imp. I-M-P, as in, it's a Poe concept. He wrote a short story called Imp of the Perverse. And it's a concept actually in psychology. And Imp of the Perverse is, have you ever walked to the edge of a cliff or a tall building and you look down and you think, oh, I'm afraid I'll fall? No, you're not. You're afraid you'll jump. That's the Imp of the Perverse. The Imp of the Perverse means that we don't do something bad in spite of knowing it's bad. We do something bad precisely because we know it's bad. That's the imp of the perverse. And in this book, Poe is the imp. I'm really proud of the book, so yeah, please read it. Leave a review. Tell me what you thought. So, but it was great fun to write. It was great fun to write. So if I have time for, I would like to. Rex said when I came, he said, you know, I know you've written some novels. You read from them. I said, yeah. He said, what else? Poetry? He said, oh, poetry. Yeah, I'm a writer. I write poetry to start a morning. You know, if you can't, a blank page is very intimidating. But a poem will usually come if you just sit there and let it, I think. Now, there are good poems and bad poems, but, you know, you do what you can do. Let me see here. Oh, here's a little excerpt from a book I'm doing now. It's not good, this isn't a poem, as you'll soon realize. It's not good to spend all your time with one social class. That's one of the things that's gone wrong with America. In a typical city like mine, for instance, rich people live here, middle-class people live there, poor people live down there, and trailer park people come and go. The rich people only go places where the other rich people go. They think God loves them the most. Middle-class citizens stick to their tight circle. They think they love God the most. Poor people can't afford the gas to go anywhere. They think God will love them the best when they're dead. The trailer park types are a subset. They don't give a shit. They think it'll be time to deal with God after they die. One of these days, I'm going to buy myself a trailer. I don't know if it'll be a good book, but I like the paragraph. Actually, I have two poems I'd like to read. Well, I'll have time for two, okay? One is, this is called Ritual of the Backwards Day, and subtitled Goddess and Chant for the Woman. The days all go backwards, for that is the flow of memory, from the now to the was to the beginning, and with such words she finds what she must find, the peace of lost music, the green of the woods. The mark of her spirit soaks through skin and into her veins. Gentle ink finds her heart and calms its drumming. There is no pain for her body, nor suffering in her bright soul, for her neck is adorned with cream and jewels. The scent of her living tears, made of roses kissed by the lotus, is a prayer of perfume rising towards heaven. When she finds the voice in her pocket, where it always is, there is the sweetness of a seed in her fertile ears. No devil or demon touches her, for the sun is too holy, the song too bright, and her golden masks calm those who would fear her. She is a door open in the wind, a pathway that leads across rivers and wanders through the clouds of her own dreams. A cushioned couch gives her rest, and her students stand on their heads to worship her riches with their breathing devotion. Each strand of her hair is silk from a caterpillar's winter cocoon. Her threads have opened and her glory gone to wing. Her feet are unclad and step soft, wrapped in the warming mud of life that becomes like the soft leather of a newborn calf. If the smoke in her mouth turns to bitter song and sorrow, a bird will sing for her with a borrowed beauty. Tall windows bring an orange breeze that dries a poem once lost to the waters. For her past will be a glory for all eyes that can see. Her days are her days. They dance, they embrace, they listen to the praise from thumb and tail in trees above. Like Paul, I did live in San Francisco for a while, not 18 years, and no corporate job, trust me. Playing some pretty disreputable clubs in North Beach, including right across from the Condor for a while. So, and those of you who know, I won't go into much detail. Look it up. Go ahead. Google the Condor Club. Trust me.
Is that the one with the sign out front, naked?
Carol Doda. Carol Doda. The world famous Carol Doda. I'm with my people. You know Carol Doda. I'm so used to hanging around students and people, and I go Carol Doda, and they just look at me like I'm crazy, you know, and there he goes again. But from those hippie roots and the somewhat adventurous times, this is a memory poem, and I'll close with this. Will this work for a closer? We're about right? Okay. I think it's not fair to always talk about the dying of the day, like night was some villain with a dark knife and days didn't deserve to die, like all of us. So I feel bad for the dying of the night. I love the night, all of them, and all of them died, will die, except the last one, the one when I die. I plan to die at night, you know. One of the nights that died was my truest love, and even though a friend once told me that if I remember, it isn't gone at all, but lives on. But that's the kind of pretending that never rings true to me. That night is plain dead. The wisdom is that my love for it isn't dead. No one needed to explain that I will always love that night. I had a friend. He lived up in the low hills near some little Iowa town that was named after a German man who got lost 121 years ago. Anyway, seems like 100 years ago. Seems like August. Seems like after midnight, dark, when I was sitting on his old porch made out of some kind of wood that looked like the back of an old farmer's neck and smelled like sweet potato skins. With a cloud of weed-borne mosquitoes stabbing at my arms like flying punctuation marks, little deep dots, periods that ended the summer sentence. It's funny when you're reading, and I read a lot, but anyway, when you're in the middle of a writer's thought, you never see the period coming. I sure didn't. 3 of the guys were playing guitar, and the Jewish kid from NYC had a beautiful silver-topped dobro and a bottle of Ham's beer that he stroked the strings with, quick back and forth, slow slide up, off and on, gentle so as not to fret. Then away and back until all the notes came together like he was teasing a girl between her legs. I just sat there on the bottom step, half broken, half whole. I just leaned back, and after I leaned back some, I leaned back again. Molly was keeping time, tapping a fork on a half-empty Boone's Farm green bottle. She had the sweetest eyes, brown like they were made of caramel, and legs to match, with a hint of strawberry burn on the top side of her thighs, and she kept ringing that glass, and the trio hit all the chords, metal and gut string harmony, and the silver dobro was running its fingers through the thick air. I might have forgot to mention that the Kathy who wanted us to call her Rose was dancing that way she did. Like she had 3 or 4 extra arms, spinning around in a red dress you could see through when the barn light was behind her. The shape of her made into a shadow I wanted to taste, and her braid made into its own orbit, and the snake tattoo on her shoulder looked like it was painted with ashes. And there was a black triangle inked on the back of her neck, like God wrote his name there, so he could never forget it. A rose that matched her red name, a thorn tangled in her hair, fell across her forehead. I thought it was a red petal eye looking at me. It's odd, feeling like someone sees you when you can't see them, no matter how hard your eyes turn out to be. I think maybe most of those times you can see, but you're afraid to. I think for sure that I see enough to know when I should. There was singing coming out of the kitchen and bread made by Earth Mothers, bossed around by Katie, who was sleeping with two of the porch guitarists, an unknown fact to one. But nobody else didn't know or cared, just so long as the air was full of wheatberry perfume. I think they played and sang and danced and were punctuated until the windbreak turned from charcoal to green sunrise, lit from behind like Rose in her naked dress. I fell in love with that part of a spinning world when the dobro came and one of the guitarists cried. I forget which one, and then Rose let me touch her triangle tattoo, and I drew another upside down over it with my finger and turned it into a star. I love that night. I love a night that can't come back. I love a night I can't go back to. That's what love is. I think well, where and when you are and who is willing to be with you or to stay away makes no difference because the sun can't burn it up. On the night I die, I will still love that night, and every night, right up to the one night that will not die, I will still try to make a star, triangle on triangle, 6 points for 60. I will draw with my fingers pointed straight up into that night. Thanks. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Thanks, Beck.
Another big hand for Otis XII. Here's the book. There's just one day in here, but one day evidently is, we always wanted to know how thick a day was, 3/4 of an inch. That's one of those unknown facts that may remain unknown in 20 minutes. I'll forget it. Somebody write it down.